Are you ready to stop riding the emotional elevator of life? Are you ready to learn how to elevate your emotions that keep you psychologically traumatized or in an addictive behavior? You are in the right place. Here is your host, Sandee Byrd, trauma, addiction, life, and spiritual coach of the Emotional Elevator Show.
Well, welcome on this wonderful Wednesday. Oh, it's a wonderful Wednesday. And tonight's episode, first, let me say, Sandee Byrd. I am an expert on trauma and addiction, and I am the host, of course, of Emotional Elevator because I have gone through an emotional elevator in my life, and it is time for me to work with others who are ready to reach that penthouse and want to stay off the ground floor, maybe go and check it out every here and there, but stay on that penthouse floor. But sometimes you got to go through the floors to see what is this floor got that I might miss? What is this floor got that I just don't want to visit again? So, of course, I'm Sandee Byrd. This is Emotional Elevator, and you are listening to the Inspired Choices Network. And if you are listening to me out there, join them tomorrow for the summit. Of course, unfortunately, I can't be there, but you can. So if you are listening to me, you're watching me live right now, and it is before tomorrow, there's a summit if you're listening to me live. If this is a replay, there might not be a summit tomorrow. But anyway, there's a summit tomorrow. Great summit, great speakers, everything. Anyway, I always want to take a moment and kind of ground yourself and just kind of breathe in and exhale. Breathe in, exhale, and breathe in and exhale. Because what I talk about a lot is very heavy topics. And I like to talk about it, and I know some people are like, "Oh, why does she got to be so heavy?" Because I am heavy. Um, no, why do I got to be so heavy? Because sometimes you got to realize that you can elevate even from heaviness. Every subject that I talk about on my podcast on Emotional Elevator, I have literally gone through. I have covered my trauma. I have covered trauma responses. I have covered addiction, obsession, and I probably should stop moving back because I know my voice goes in and out. I have covered cold mother syndrome, which I did to my own children. I have covered many topics on here that have been all topics that I have worked through myself and topics that I continue to work through. So if you're joining me for the first time, go back and listen to some of them. Some of them might really resonate to you, and some of them might not. But this is what my show is. It's all about getting through these traumas, but also elevating yourself because you can change. You can change your brain format. You can change who you think you are. You can change who you want to be. You can change all that. I am 55 and I know I have reprogrammed my brain. You have neurotransponders, you have neuroplasticity that I've learned all about, where we can reprogram our brains. We don't think we can. We feel like up until 5, that's it, or up until we get out of high school or college, that's it. No, we can really reprogram our brains. So last week I talked about flight or flight, fight or flight, fight or flight, fight or flight, just run away from trauma. And this week, it's really about freeze or fawn, but I'm also going to talk about flop because I just kind of left flop out. But we are going to talk about on this one freeze, fawn, and flop, which is not in the title, but we're going to talk about it. And what these responses are from is trauma responses. And I like to always say trauma does not mean you need to go through as I heard today too, the big T. Big T of trauma means some of what I've gone through. I've been gang raped. I have been date raped. I have been in domestic violence. I come from an alcoholic mother, blah, 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 blah. That does not define me. And that does not mean those traumas are any bigger or less than anyone else's trauma. Because the other traumas I have gone through, and then I'll probably talk about, are the ones that really sit on us. And I've gone over this in one of my podcasts, is sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. That's bullshit. And I said it, excuse the language, but that's what some of the trauma is. And some of the responses to this is because of the names we were called or the names we called ourselves. Because it's more when we start working on ourselves, it's the names we call ourselves or the names we can't get past. Like if you were in 5th grade and you answered a question and it was the wrong answer and everybody laughed and said, "You so stupid." Well, then sometimes we grow up thinking we're stupid from one situation because we can't get that program out of our brain. We can't get that program out of our brain. So tonight's topic is about the fawn, freeze, and I am going to go over flop. So basically what fawn is that people pleasing. Well, see, if I people please, and all of these, like I'm saying, are definitely responses to trauma that I've overcome. Now, when it comes to people pleasing, that is not a trauma response for me when it comes to being raped, domestic violence. That is not. The fawn part does not come from that because I'm just telling you, my fawn, my people pleasing does not come from that. It comes a lot more from the cold mother syndrome. It comes a lot from being teased because what fawn really is it's that people pleasing. It's that we've got to please other people so they'll like us. So if you've ever been bullied or you never felt you were good enough, smart enough, pretty enough, fawn sometimes is your trauma response to that. That if I just people please everybody, they'll like me. They'll, or if you just kind of lay down, submit to people, that's fawn. That is what fawn is. So it's those very big people pleasing skills. It's when you go to a meeting for all you business people, when you go to a meeting and you take the goodies with you, you bring the muffins or you bring the good stuff. Basically, you know what? Who doesn't like to be fed when you're at a meeting? It's that trauma response. And like last week, I really don't want to go into the big physiological, scientific reason why we have that. But when it comes to this, they promote those hormones of cortisol and adrenaline. When it comes to freeze, flight, fawn, flop, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, flop, we're increasing cortisol and adrenaline in us. And why we're doing that is because it is a response to something that has got us agitated. So when I think of fawn, it's the people pleasing for sure for me. I don't do this much anymore, but I'm not 100% cured with that. And how do you recognize that you people please? Whenever you're going somewhere and you're nervous and you feel like you got to bring something, or you're going out with a friend and you got to have this difficult conversation with them, so you buy their dinner or their lunch or their breakfast. Or you don't want to have a conversation with someone, so you buy them a card. That's fawn. Every time I hear fawn, it's almost like you're fawning out to them. Hey, if I just fawn to them, if I wave at them, if I smile at them, everything's going to be all right. But sometimes we've got to get into those difficult conversations. Sometimes we've got to get into what it is. Why is this that response? Why are we having the fawn response when it comes to this situation? Why? So that's a lot about fawn. We'll go more into detail, but it's recognizing whenever you start feeling like, oh, I gotta people please people, why? It's going back and asking yourself that question, why? And like with all of these trauma responses, whenever you feel like you're getting hyped up, the cortisol, the adrenaline's going in your body, take a moment. Because whenever you focus on your breath and slow it down, you're calming yourself down. You can accomplish anything when you do that. So when you think about fawning or people pleasing, you can, what in this situation do I feel that I need to overcompensate? Why do I feel the need? Why do I not feel comfortable having that conversation? So do I avoid the conversation? Let me just get him a card and I'll write it down and I'll slip it in her purse or I'll just hand it to him at the end. The fawn is also the whenever you're in a disagreement or there's a struggle with your significant other, a child, a parent, a coworker, a boss, and you write a little note. Hey, blah, 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 whatever it is. You write the note because you don't want to have the conversation face to face. So you kind of just do that little note because you don't feel comfortable having the conversation face to face. That's what fawn is. And then we'll start talking about freeze, because freeze is basically what that is. You freeze. You just freeze. It's like musical chairs, and then you freeze, and then you look around, because that's what freeze is. And then flop, of course, is you just you really submiss. You really submiss to the person. And why do you submiss to them? So that's what tonight's topic is all about. It's about going into these trauma responses. And like I said, trauma is not, when people want to come on here or work with me, they feel like, well, I don't have that big a trauma. Any trauma, any trauma, from being bullied to being harassed to feeling you're not good enough to feeling stupid. I really hate that word and I don't like that word around me. But it's just those feelings of inadequacy or lack of, that's a trauma. Something created you to have these thoughts in your brain and in your mind. And why? Why do we have that? Why is it easier for us to replay those thoughts than it is for us to reprogram those thoughts? But we can reprogram those thoughts. And that's why when you recognize when you're doing things like fawn, when you're doing that, recognizing, why am I doing this? Why am I trying to avoid this conversation? And have a conversation with yourself. Why am I avoiding a conversation? But here's another thing. You don't know how that conversation is going to turn out until you approach that conversation. And there has been many a times, many times in my life where I've suspected a conversation was going to be had, and it wasn't had. So that is what fawn is. Fawn is the basics of people pleasing. And when we do people pleasing to get out of our heads or out of a trauma response. See, I'm struggling right now because I had to update my Zoom, and right now there's a little thing going off of my Zoom, and I'm just trying to make sure that everything is fine with it because it was just doing a little wacky thing there. But that's what I'm saying. Just wanted to check it out. Didn't freeze, didn't flight, didn't fight it. Just kind of said, let me check it out. So that is what freeze, fawn, well, fawn is. We'll go more into freeze after our break. It is already time for our first break. So I want you to think while we're on break, what times in your life have you basically practiced the fawn response? And why did you practice the fawn response? But we are going to our first break. Of course, you're listening to me, Sandee Byrd, on Emotional Elevator on the Inspired Choices Network. And I am so privileged to be part of such a great network of great people. So check all of us out. We're all experts on topics because of what we have gone through in life or what we're continuing to elevate other people in going through. So again, thank you for joining me. Oh, yes. And if you want, come over here to Inspired Choices Network and let's start a chat going. But if this is not comfortable for you and you would rather reach out to me alone, reach out to me at sandy@emotionalelevator.com or Sandee Byrd Coach, Sandee Byrd Coach, Sandee with two E's, Bird with a Y, coach at gmail.com, because that is my coaching email. But we are going to go on our first break. Time is already flying tonight. Thank you for joining me.
Are you living a life of psychological trauma or suffering from an addiction? Are you ready to learn new techniques to elevate your emotions without sustaining or obtaining them from substances that are not good for your mind or body? Then continue to tune into Emotional Elevator with trauma, addiction, life, and spiritual coach, Sandee Byrd, where you will learn techniques to elevate your emotions that don't require a magic pill, food, or impulsive behavior. Listen to Emotional Elevator with Sandee Byrd, Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Mountain, 4 p.m. Pacific, on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com.
Are you a subject matter expert? Are you here to share your expertise with an audience waiting to hear from you in only the way you can deliver? Are you ready to have your voice amplified across the airwaves? Inspired Choices Network has a global radio platform streaming to millions of people across the world. Professionally produced and supported by an accomplished team every step of the way, you can broadcast from anywhere in the world, knowing your voice matters, and we ensure it is delivered with ease and efficiency. Eager to hear your message, the world awaits. Contact us today to become an Inspired Choices Network radio host. Email become a host at inspiredchoicesnetwork.com.
This is Emotional Elevator with Sandee Byrd. To participate in this program, join the live studio audience in our chat room at inspiredchoicesnetwork.com. You can also send an email to sandy@emotionalelevator.com. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back. You're joining me tonight, and we are talking about fawn, freeze, and flop, which was not really included, but kind of want to talk about flop in this series of last week was fight and flight. Tonight is fawn, freeze, and I kind of want to go over flop. But what I also want to continue to say is all of these areas that I talk about and I'm an expert on is areas that I have gone through. And I've been able to elevate myself. And if I can elevate myself, you can elevate yourself. It's just taking steps to elevate yourself. And as I continue to work with people and talk about, we can reprogram our brains. We can reprogram our brains. We can start recognizing these trauma responses like fight, flight, fawn, freeze, flop, we can recognize them. And the whole thing is a lot of people say, well, I mean, yeah, I know I have a fight response. Why do you have the fight response? Yeah, but you know what? It's kept me safe. Has it kept you with joy? Does it keep you happy? Because that's a lot of what I've gone through in my life. I've spent my life, and my shit can go on forever with, as things come up for me and topics come up with me for me. I've spent my life in trauma responses, anywhere from fight to flight, to fawn to freeze, and to flop. Now, think about that. If all day I am dealing with adrenaline, cortisol running through my body, I'm exhausted. Aren't you exhausted? Are you exhausted when you sit back and you go, gosh, today I'm exhausted. I felt like I was running everywhere. I was doing this, I was doing that. Why? Fawn is that people pleasing, and that's what I started talking about, and I've already addressed, is fawn is that people pleasing. It's when we're afraid to have that conversation. It's when we feel like, think about this. I know everyone here has worked. I don't think there's anyone on here that's too young to say, oh, I've never worked a day in my life, or have been in a marriage, or have been in a committed relationship, or have had a parent, a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle. Anyway, have you ever been in a situation where, oh gosh, every time I come over, my mom is always bringing up, when am I going to have a kid? Or when am I going to find a man? Or when am I going to do this? Or when am I going to move on in my life? When am I going to go for that promotion? When am I going to, all those whens. So what do? We bring something to deter the conversation, or we bring the favorite ice cream to them because we don't want to have the conversation. That is fawn. That is fawn. That is what fawn is. And sometimes we end up not having that conversation, but we've already done that. We've already gotten into that response, like, I got to do something to people please. Or when you do a project at work and you feel like, oh gosh, it wasn't that good, so you put fluffer around it. You make it look prettier. That's fine. Or you're having a meeting and you don't feel as prepared because one of the meetings before you flopped. So you go in and you're bringing all the goodies. So they look past that. That's fun. So now let's kind of dive into freeze. Freeze is when you just literally stop doing anything. You just freeze. You literally freeze. Your body shuts down and it just freezes. How is this response? How is that trauma response good if a trauma is happening? If I act like a tree, they'll never know I'm there. Freezing is also can be a trauma response that when you recognize it, why am I freezing? Why am I stopping? You're hurrying to walk to somewhere, going to see a friend or a boss, and you hear let's say it's in your boss's office, and you hear another coworker in there, and he's like, I told you not to do that. And then you just freeze. You just freeze. Why did you freeze in that situation? Is that you? And when did that become a trauma response for you? Did something happen where you did have that freeze? So now every single time a conflict comes up, you freeze? Because a lot of people who get into the freeze mode are people who have had, and I've been in freeze mode before when you've had something traumatic happen in front of you, or when you've been involved in robbery or a theft. Your first response is freeze. And you just freeze. I've been there. Things I've seen things happen from a distance, and it's caused me just to freeze. But now why I can breathe. Okay, I can move forward. Because I always come back to this thing we call a breath, because the breath is one thing that we don't necessarily control within us. We don't control our heart either. But we have moments where we can control our breath, that our breath can control us. So think about that. There are times with our breath that we can control our breath, so our breath can control us. So it can calm down the parasympathetic. So it can calm down the nervous system. So it can calm down the hypothalamus. So it can calm down our cortisol. So it can calm down the hormones that are the adrenaline, the cortisol. It can calm it down. Because if you think about it, if you're all hyped up, and then you go, it slows it back down. It gives you the opportunity to look at the situation and clearly regulate yourself for that situation. And I know another big technique when it comes to people who freeze is to do tapping. And if you don't know much about tapping, you can reach out to me. But tapping or doing something that gets you to have a response, even if you were to just kind of pat your hands together. There's some where you do like a butterfly on the chest, and it just gets you to start moving again. It gets your system to start, okay, I'm fine, I'm safe. And that's another big response to all of this, is telling yourself, I am fine, I am safe. I am fine, I am safe. Because these responses are responses that we do when there is no trauma happening. But if there was trauma and you have to freeze, yeah, you're going to freeze. But what I mean is when you hear someone screaming or something and you just freeze in place because that is your trauma response, breathing, I am safe, I am fine. And also talking to yourself in the third person, or talking just to yourself. Sandee, you are safe. Sandee, you are fine. Sandee, we've got this, is another way for you to embrace these trauma responses and to calm down the adrenaline and the cortisol, because those actually get us so hyped that sometimes we can't see past our response. So if we're frozen, and we're literally frozen, remember that breath is continuing. Feel for your pulse. Your pulse is still going. Problem with feeling for your pulse sometimes could be that because of the hormones acting up, you're going to feel it. But it's an indication that you are safe. And if you breathe, if you're in a trauma response and your heart rate's just beating out of your chest, if you take calm breaths, you will literally, scientifically proven, you will be able to feel your pulse start slowing down. Because when you take that deep breath in and let it out, you're reducing those hormones, the adrenaline and the cortisol. You're actually reducing them. So think about that when you're frozen as your trauma response, that you can just take that moment to breathe and tell yourself, I'm safe, I'm fine, I'm good, I can face this. Because like I've already said, we can reprogram the brain from all of these responses. So, of course, it's time for our next break. I am Sandee Byrd on Emotional Elevator on the Incredible Inspired Choices Network. And like I've said, reach out to me. If you don't feel comfortable coming in these chats, reach out to me at Sandee@emotionalelevator.com. Reach out to me at sandeebirdcoach@gmail.com. That is my business email. Because I am here to help you with all of these trauma responses, addiction, sessions, generational curses. Because when we start realizing that we can reprogram our brain with neuroplasticity and refire these neurotransmitters that we feel like we can't, we can change these responses to trauma, or we can elevate ourselves to just create the response that is appropriate in the situation. So we are going to our break. And thank you for joining me tonight. Sure, we're on a break. We've been having a little bit of technical difficulties, but that is fine. Technical I can't even say it. I'm stumped on my own words. Technical difficulty is what life is. That is what life is all about, is having these technical difficulties in life, and we just go on. It's when we can sit back and go, you know what? I can continue to go. And when we're back on and back together and everything's going and I know she's back here, we'll go to break. So right now it's just going with it. And that's why working on your traumas, working on yourself, and it's not even working on the traumas, it's working on yourself, diving into these responses. I'm going to say this probably was one of the biggest challenges, because I knew how all my traumas were affecting me, personality, and everything. But when I started diving into the responses, the trauma response, this is what elevated my emotions, because I realized I was people pleasing everybody, because I didn't think if everybody knew my traumas, if I became vulnerable, if they all knew it, would they like me? No. And then if they wanted to ask me about, wow, you said you were getting raped. If they wanted to ask me about it, I would freeze and I would fawn. Well, maybe if we talk about this or do this, they won't ask me about it. So that's why when I realized that I had what response came on with an action, it was the best, I'm going to say best stress reliever, the best thing that changed within me. So when we talk about freeze, I used to freeze whenever So our technical difficulties is done. But anyway, I'm going to finish this and then we are going to go to break. So the biggest help in even my marriage and everything like that was whenever we were in conflict, I would freeze. I would just freeze or I would fight. When I was able to take the step back, and this is why I say the most powerful work I did was to realize what my responses were to certain situations. But like I said, I would either freeze or I would fight. And in my first marriage, I would flight. I would run. I would literally run. And when I realize now, if I can sit down and have the conversation, as difficult and as comfortable, I'm now comfortable. And what I would do was say, okay, can we take a moment? I do that a lot now. When my kids want a response, when my husband wants a response, when I'm dealing with a stressful situation or a client has, triggered something. If you don't think working with clients doesn't sometimes trigger you or trigger me, it does. But now it's knowing, let me write this down because I can go back to that. But we are going to go on a break. So we are going to go on our second break. We are back and we will be right back. Like I said, reach out to me, sandeebirdcoach@gmail.com, sandy@emotionalelevator.com. But if you just want to get on a 30-minute call with me and just say, you know what, this is what I've been struggling with. Can you help? Because a lot of this has been a game changer for my whole life. And I've got 50 more years possibly to go. And I've recreated a different life because I've worked on this and I help others work on this. Let's go to our break.
Are you living a life of psychological trauma or suffering from an addiction? Are you ready to learn new techniques to elevate your emotions without sustaining or obtaining them from substances that are not good for your mind or body? Then continue to tune into Emotional Elevator with trauma, addiction, life, and spiritual coach, Sandee Byrd, where you will learn techniques to elevate your emotions that don't require a magic pill, food, or impulsive behavior. Listen to Emotional Elevator with Sandee Byrd, Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Mountain, 4 p.m. Pacific, on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com.
How wonderful would it be to carry your favorite Inspired Choices Network host with you throughout your day? Well, now you can. Inspired Choices Network now has its very own mobile app. Our free app offers live streaming shows, along with thousands of podcasts and TV episodes. Our shows cover a wide variety of topics. Whether you're waking up with us, carrying us through the day, and taking us to bed with you, we're always here for you to enjoy. We're easy to find. Just search for Inspired Choices Network in the Apple App Store or Google Play Store.
This is Emotional Elevator with Sandee Byrd. To participate in this program, join the live studio audience in our chat room at InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. You can also send an email to sandy@emotionalelevator.com. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back. And I'm sorry if I just yawned at you. I apologize because yawn is just as contagious as laughter. But tonight's topic has all been about the Fawn, freeze, and a little bit I'm going to talk about flop. But like I said, to know my responses, my trauma responses to any given situation has been one of the most rewarding gifts I gave to myself because it gave me the confidence to get through any situation at this point in my life. Because now I know if I take a moment, ground myself, breathe, slow down the cortisol, slow down the adrenaline, I can conquer anything with confidence. And that has been one of the, and I said earlier, it's one of the best gifts. It is one of the best gifts. It's not the best gift. It's one of the best gifts I did for myself, is for me to realize that. And we all can do this. We all have the ability to recreate our responses to everything. Everything we can. I am living proof of it, and I know we can because, like I say, I have experienced every single one of these responses in my life, and I always was anxious. If you have a lot of anxiety in your life, it's because you're always living in a trauma response. And I probably should have started with this last week, and now I'm saying it now as I nod my head. If you deal with a lot of anxiety, it's because you are living in trauma response. Everything has you triggered in a trauma response. And the way to start working on that is to realize, what is my response? Why am I going through this response? How can I elevate myself to not be in this response? And like I said, the first thing you can do is breathe. Slow down your breath and then talk to yourself. I am safe. I am okay. If you have to talk to yourself and call yourself by name, do that. Whatever works. And here's the thing too. If you question why you are in that response, go back to it. I don't know that many people that don't carry a phone. Put it in your phone. Today, when I was at the grocery store and I heard this mom say this to a child, it triggered me into a trauma response. I could feel my heart pounding. I could feel that. Why? Then you can go back and ask yourself, why? Why did that affect me? That's what takes a lot of practice, and I do that all the time. So if ever I'm somewhere and something triggers me to have a trauma response, I have the knowledge, because I am recreating neuroplasticity in my brain, to have the response to say, okay, why do I feel like fighting in this instant? Why do I feel like fleeing in this instant? Why do I feel like freezing? Why do I feel like Fawn? Why do I feel like, because I asked, biggest thing right now is when you ask someone, well, why do you believe that? Why do you think that? Why do you believe that? Why do you feel that? And you ask them the question, and then they're like, well, because da 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 da, and you're like, okay, well, I'm sorry. Or, I'm so sorry I made you feel like that, right away without even asking the question. That is a trauma response, that you want them to like you, that you don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, that you just want to please them, instead of, you're putting yourself aside. You're putting your beliefs, your values, your own preferences aside when you do that. So, oh gosh, it's almost time for our next break. But flop. The way to describe flop, have you ever just seen a person walking a dog and they just flop? That's flop. You just give in. You just completely give in. You can be in a discussion and you're like, okay, you win. That's flop. You're just giving in. You're just completely giving in. You're submitting completely to the other person, to the situation, to whatever, because that is a trauma response as well, just a flop. Well, I just don't want to get into this discussion. So I'm just gonna, whatever you think, whatever you say, we'll do whatever you want. That's flop. And that also is a trauma response to something that could have happened when you were younger. And it still sits in that back of that subconscious. So that's what those responses are. And like I said, the biggest thing you can do is slow your heart down, slow the adrenaline down, slow the cortisol down, and just slow it down so you have a moment to say, okay, how do I want to respond in this? Do I feel like I'm being attacked? Why do I feel like I'm being attacked? Because maybe you're not being attacked at all. You're just being questioned. Why do I feel like they're not going to hear what I have to say? Why do I feel like what I say isn't valuable? Why do I feel like my kids aren't going to listen to me? Why do I feel like my husband is not going to hear what I have to say? Because would you listen to me more if I talk like this and just seemed very comforting? Or would you respond better if I raised my voice and got a little bit sounding like I'm a little bit being more aggressive? No, you're going to respond to this. But why will you respond to this? And not to when I start talking like this and sounding a little bit more aggressive. Is that because that could be a response? Maybe when you were in second grade, your teacher talked very aggressively and, Sandy, you should know better. Talk like that. So now, whenever someone talks like that, you feel the need to fight, flight, freeze, fawn, flop, because that is a response to a trauma. So we are going on our last break. You've been joining me, Sandee Byrd, on Emotional Elevator, the Inspired Choices Network. Like I said, reach out to me. My email is sandy@emotionalelevator.com or sandeebyrdcoach@gmail.com. I would love just to have a little chit chat if you deal with any of these responses and want to know just some tips to help you recognize your response and how to elevate yourself so your responses aren't controlling your day and living in anxiety or fear or agitated. So we are going to go to our last break tonight.
Are you living a life of psychological trauma or suffering from an addiction? Are you ready to learn new techniques to elevate your emotions without sustaining or obtaining them from substances that are not good for your mind or body? Then continue to tune into Emotional Elevator with trauma, addiction, life, and spiritual coach, Sandee Byrd, where you will learn techniques to elevate your emotions that don't require a magic pill, food, or impulsive behavior. Listen to Emotional Elevator with Sandee Byrd, Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Mountain, 4 p.m. Pacific, on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. This is Emotional Elevator with Sandee Byrd. To participate in this program, join the live studio audience in our chat room at InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. You can also send an email to sandy@emotionalelevator.com. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back. Welcome back. So tonight I've gone over all the trauma responses, went a little bit over the two that I spoke about last week, fight or flight. And tonight's was fawn, freeze, and flop. And these responses have to do with a response that we had when we had a trauma. And like I continue to say, it doesn't have to be like I hear all the time. There are big T's, little T's. They're all T's. They are all T's. They're all teases. They're T's. And it can be, trauma can be a child and you were laughed at because you had an answer wrong. It can be as simple as simple. That's the wrong word to use. It can be something that just harassing. It can be your parents said something to you and you took it completely to heart. It can be something that your brother or sister said. It can be something that your grandma said. It can be something that formed a false belief or thought or feeling within yourself, because that's all they are. Why is it that we are so quick to not remember the great thing we did in third grade, but we're quick to remember in third grade when I stood in front of the chalkboard and I got the answer wrong and everyone told me I was stupid? We can remember that, but we can't remember getting an award in third grade for having the best attendance or the best this. But we can remember that. But the other thing I want you to remember is that you are not stuck in who you are. You can recreate your life. There is so much, if you're a science person, a math person, there is so much out there about how we can reprogram our brains. We never give that up. It's neuroplasticity. It's a way we can reprogram our brains. But like I said, whenever you are feeling like you are having a lot of anxiety, you feel like your heart is always pounding, take that moment. And breathe. Slow it down. Ask yourself, why am I having a response? Why do I feel fear? Why am I frightened? What in this moment has got me feeling fearful, frightful, anxious? Why? And then how can you change the response to it? How can you change the response to it? Because when we just continue to cycle it around, things don't change and we continue to be anxious every day. And do you want to live your life every day anxious, feeling like your heart is pounding out of your chest, feeling like your head is about to explode, feeling like your gut is stopped up? No. But the way to do that is to start recognizing and working on. Because the only way to get through all this is to work on it. And that's what I'm here for. We can walk hand in hand, screen to screen, and get through this. Because I can tell you, it is so more liberating on the other side. And of course, tonight, I am Sandee Byrd. I am the host of Emotional Elevator. I have gone through that elevator from the top to the bottom. Now I'm back on top. But I like to visit all the floors again just to see, what did I like on this floor? What didn't I like on this floor? But reach out to me. Sandee Byrd is my website. My email is sandeebirdcoach@gmail.com. My other email is sandy@emotionalelevator.com. But you have been listening to me on Emotional Elevator on the Inspired Choices Network. I have been talking about fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and flop. So, like I said, just breathe. Take a moment to slow yourself down and ask yourself, why am I having the response that I'm having in this situation? Then start elevating yourself. I am safe. I'm happy. I'm joyful.
Thank you for listening to the Emotional Elevator Show. Sandee returns Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Mountain, 4 p.m. Pacific on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. Until then, start elevating your emotions and stop riding the emotional elevator that is stopping you from living the life you deserve.